Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Free Thought Prophet. I am Seamus. You may know him from such voice narrations from such audiobooks as The Misanthropic Mohican, The Grapes of Disinterest, All the King's Schmigma, The Brown Badge of Discontent, The Catcher in the Barley, and of course, The Bartender Always Pours Twice. He is, of course, the Smooth Newt. Live from Ireland, John Hamill.
I like the last one best, where the bartender pours twice. That's a good one. That'll be the name of your next band, Seamus. Good. So this evening we wanted to record a special edition, which will be our referendum special. So the big news in Ireland at the minute is that at long last we have a referendum coming up on the 8th Amendment to our Constitution, which is the provision that bans abortion in almost all circumstances, and it's an explicitly religiously inspired provision in the Constitution that has caused an incredible amount of harm over the years. So we wanted to talk about that, given that the vote's coming up in 2 weeks, and I didn't want to read out a formal bio for our guest because Ashling O'Brien is a very good friend of mine, I'm happy and proud to say. Ashling's really wonderful. If there's really no one who's done more in terms of campaigning on this issue than Ashling. If you follow her on Twitter, you'll see she hasn't stopped canvassing over recent months, and this has come on the back of really years of work on this issue. Most recently, she presented on behalf of Atheist Ireland to the Irish Constitutional Convention, which is the body that really instigated the referendum campaign that we're having at the minute. So the last time we talked to Ashling, it was just after the convention, and we talked about her presentation alongside a representative of the Catholic bishops and the Protestant bishops in Ireland. And so we wanted to talk with Ashling again before we have the vote, which, as I say, is less than 2 weeks away now.
Yeah. It's always great to talk with her. I think this is the second time at least we've talked to her. So,
yes, indeed.
Formally, so to speak.
Indeed.
So she's a lot of fun. So
great.
Enough of that.
So let's get Ashling.
Hey folks, if you want to keep up with what's going on with the freethoughtprophet.com, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Click the subscribe button and also the little bell so you can get your notifications of upcoming episodes. You can also see all of our archived episodes there as well. Also on Podbeam. You can listen to us audio only, of course. You can also check out all the previous episodes and blogs there as well. And you could hear us via iTunes as well. The freethoughtprophet.com has all these as well as previous blogs and other materials for your viewing pleasure. So please keep up with us in the future, and thanks again for all your support.
Welcome to the Free Thought Prophet, Ashling O'Brien.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Great, thanks. So the last time we talked with you, Ashling, it was just after the Constitutional Convention, at which you spoke so well, and the big news since then is that we have the referendum at last here in Ireland. So firstly, congratulations on that. I know a huge amount of work went in to actually getting the referendum. But it's now, I think, less than 2 weeks until the vote. So maybe just to remind anyone who's not that familiar with the issue, would you mind just restating what the 8th Amendment to the Irish Constitution says and what the vote is about?
Absolutely. So I know the last time we spoke, I had just spoke at the Citizens' Assembly and we hadn't gotten their report yet. They hadn't taken a vote. So we did go into quite a lot of depth in the last podcast just around the history of the 8th and the timeline and the whole thing. So I don't want to go through all that again.
Sure.
But I suppose just to give context, the 8th Amendment was voted into the Irish Constitution in 1983, but quite a significant majority. And the wording that was put into the Constitution, which is, for all intents and purposes, a constitutional ban on abortion. So the actual wording is, the state acknowledges the right to the life of the unborn and, with due regard to the equal right to the life of the mother, guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as practicable by its laws, to defend and vindicate that right. So what it basically is it's an amendment into the Constitution that says that the unborn has an equal right to life as what they refer to as the mother, the pregnant woman, and the unborn is the fetus at any stage of development, regardless of how that pregnancy is going, regardless of her health, regardless of how that pregnancy was conceived. This unborn, which I always think always reminds me of the undead, is equal, has equal right to life of the mother. So that was back in '83 that we had that voted in. 35 years later, we've just had, I suppose, a litany and an alphabet soup of women who have been injured and hurt and have died and have been tortured by the Eighth Amendment ever since. Sorry, I've just had a cat climb across me. Hang on, shifter. So where were we? Distracted by a cat.
I think you're right in terms of the really the litany of cases. I think you mentioned the alphabet soup, and the context there is that each time we have one of these horrible cases that reaches the courts, they talk about Miss A, Miss B, Miss C in order to provide some anonymity. But it seems like they're almost running out of letters. There's just been so many of these cases.
I mean, some of the ones were probably, I know we discussed a lot of them the last time we spoke, was Miss X, who was the young 14-year-old girl who had been raped by a neighbor for abortion, and the police, could they use samples from the fetus for DNA testing to try and catch and imprison the rapist. And when the police became aware of the fact that they were going to travel with their daughter, the state took an injunction to prevent her from travelling to the UK for a termination of pregnancy. That case was taken to the High Court. So that really was quite a significant case. And from after that case, we had 2 further referendums to put amendments in to give women the right to travel and to give them the right to information. So then we've had... more recently, we've had the tragic case of Savita Halapanava, which we also spoke about. Savita was a young woman pregnant on her first pregnancy, a much wanted pregnancy, and she began to miscarriage and went into hospital with an inevitable miscarriage, and she asked for a termination of pregnancy for an abortion, and she was told, well, no, we can't do that because there's still a fetal heartbeat. So their hands were tied. The doctors didn't want to do it, to act. They couldn't act. Constitutionally, they couldn't act. They couldn't give her the care she needed. And they waited and they waited to see if the fetus would die. And it didn't. And they waited. And she ended up dying of sepsis. We had a recent case of a young raped migrant woman, a refugee woman who arrived in Ireland pregnant and suicidal. And they took out an injunction to force feed her and make her carry the pregnancy up until as close to viability, where they delivered by cesarean section. That poor woman actually managed to get as far as England, but because she didn't have the papers to travel as a refugee, they sent her back to Ireland. So she was denied an abortion. And even more recently, we had the case of, because since 2003, we've had the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act, which they brought in after Savita's death. And that allowed for a termination of pregnancy on the grounds of the woman's life was in danger, including through risk of suicide. So we had a young pregnant teenager who herself and her mother went through the process of trying to secure a termination of pregnancy because she was suicidal. And she was told, well, look, come up to Dublin, gave her an appointment, and they thought the appointment was for an abortion. And when she got there, they sectioned her under the Mental Health Act. Hospital to try and to keep her alive and to try and keep her pregnant. And we've had a horrific case, like a Frankenstein case, where a woman was pregnant, 15 weeks pregnant, when she had a massive, I think it was a massive brain hemorrhage, but was clinically brain dead. And the High Court, the HSE, which is our public health service, took her family had to take them to the High Court to try and get them to turn off the life support machine from this clinically brain dead woman who was 15, 16 weeks pregnant with a non-viable fetus. And they were trying to somehow keep her going as an incubator to see, it was just this disgusting medical experiment was carried out on this woman. And 8 different doctors gave evidence at that case and said, there is no way we're getting a baby out of this. Let the poor go. And we had a more recent case again of a woman who had her first pregnancy. She'd given birth by cesarean. And her second pregnancy, she said that she would like to try for a vaginal birth. And her doctor said, well, no, that's not a good idea. We want you to have a cesarean. And she ended up taking a case to the High Court because they refused to give her the consent for cesarean. The information that came out at the time was kind of hidden a little bit. Some information has come out since. The HSE, the health provider, actually applied to the judge to have police stationed outside the hospital should she try to escape. And they applied to have people who were trained, men who were trained in practices for restrictive practices, like to hold someone down, physically restrain someone, to have them in the room with her should she attempt to fight them. Now, thankfully, the judge said, and they used the 8th, they waived the 8th and said, well, we can do this because we're doing it because the life of the unborn, we're protecting the life of the unborn. And a woman we don't have to have her consent. We have the 8th Amendment. And thankfully, the judge said, no, this is just taking the 8th Amendment just a little too far. So there are a few cases that we've actually had since the last time we spoke. Some of those cases have happened. I think in the past what would have happened is this would have all been covered up, and the shame and the stigma that women wouldn't have spoken out about what was happening. But women have gotten braver and they're speaking out, and we're learning about more and more of these cases that would have just been hushed up in the past. And it continues. Yeah, and so it continues.
That's just hard to believe that this is still going on. That's just, wow.
Yeah.
So we discussed the campaign with some other guests recently. We talked to Valerie Tarico, and I know that the 12 weeks has been frequently referred to as term. Can you say a few words about the significance of this?
Yeah, so the 12 weeks first came up after we spoke. The Citizens Assembly came up with their recommendations, and they voted on what, in the end, was 13 different areas that they took a vote on. And in every single area, the majority of the citizens voted to support. So things they looked to support were abortion for health, including mental health, abortion for socioeconomic reasons. So the Citizens Assembly ended up coming up with a list of recommendations that were just incredibly more liberal than we could ever have hoped for or could ever have imagined. And this kind of caught the government by surprise, because you've got to remember, this was an exercise in kicking a can down a road. This was, the government didn't want to deal with it. So the Citizens Assembly report with their recommendations also included abortion without reason up to 12 weeks. And the reason they gave was, when they listened to the experts on this, when they looked at issues like rape and incest, and where, I suppose what the no side describe as the hard cases, but the cases where even people who are uncomfortable with abortion generally think, yes, it should be available if a woman is raped, or in the case of incest. And the only way they could make sure they could protect these women was by giving them the 12 weeks. So abortion without reason, up to 12 weeks. So then you wouldn't have to, if you were a survivor of rape, that you wouldn't have to go to the guards and report the rape in order to be believed, in order to get an abortion. So this is where kind of the 12 weeks began to be discussed. The Citizens Assembly recommendations then went on to the Joint Oireachtas Committee, And what basically that was a committee made up of TDs, so serving members of our parliament from various different parties and independents, and they came up with the same recommendation. They heard a lot of experts as well, and they came up with the 12-week recommendation as well. So what we have is we can't actually publish legislation because it would be unconstitutional because we have the 8th. But what the government have done is they've published a heads of bill, which is a rough outline of the type of legislation that would be debated should this referendum pass. And 12 weeks without reason is included in that heads of bill.
Yeah, and whereas the 12 weeks is what the government talks about in terms of the heads of bill, it seems like the no side are focusing more on this 6 months figure. What will be the legal significance of 6 months if the referendum carries and the heads of bill is passed?
So the 6 months came up when they looked at cases of fatal fetal abnormality. A lot of those cases won't be detected until maybe 20 or 24 weeks into pregnancy. So they've missed that 12-week. And you've got to remember, though, these are much wanted pregnancies. Yeah. These are pregnancies that women have carried. And they get that devastating news that the fetus just is incompatible with life and it has a fatal abnormality. So what the government are proposing is that up to the 6 month mark, you would be able to access a termination on the grounds of fatal fetal abnormality. But once you reach the point at 24 weeks, that's 6 months, that the fetus is then viable. That's generally medically accepted, that it wouldn't be an abortion, that it would be an early delivery, and every attempt would be made to save the life of the baby at that stage. The no side are making a huge thing of this, and they're saying we're introducing abortion up to 6 months, which isn't the case. It's the case that we are looking at a termination of pregnancy in the most tragic of circumstances up to the point of viability of the fetus. Past viability, they're looking at delivering whenever they can a live baby, and doing what they can to save that life.
One thing that the Irish anti-abortion campaigners seem to have in common with American over here anti-abortion campaigners is the use of some pretty shocking set of images. The use of these images outside maternity hospitals is especially despicable. Were you surprised by these tactics?
I'd love to say I was. There's nothing they can do at this stage that would surprise me. I sat down and I just kind of jotted out some of the stuff just off the top of my head that has happened in this campaign alone. So very early on, we had Down Syndrome Ireland ask that no group involved in either side of the campaign would use people with Down syndrome as part of their argument, because from very early on, the no side said, I remember a few years back being at an anti-choice conference in Dublin, and the words disability holocaust were used by David Quinn from the Iona Institute. I tweeted it at the time. So Down syndrome and disability from very early on was something that they used. And they have put up, only today, they've started putting up a whole rake of new posters showing the image of a young girl, a child with Down syndrome. And 90% of Down syndrome children in England are aborted, is the fact that they've put on this poster. And they use the Iceland figure that there's no children with Down syndrome in Iceland. They use all these, all of which have been debunked. But they still use all of this. So that's one thing from very early on that they started using. Only recently we had our Minister for Health, Simon Harris, in his constituency, they put up fake posters, that replicas of his election posters, but they had photoshopped an aborted fetus into the background of the poster, put them up outside his home, all around his constituency.
Good grief.
We've had the no side use who turned out to be a fake nurse. This guy, they made a video and they were promoting this video, and he was on posters. And basically he was saying that was a nurse who had been in operation theatres where abortions were carried out. And he gave these graphic descriptions, and said, fetal parts were left in buckets and all this horrific stuff. It's ridiculous. It wasn't our media who chased up this story. It was a midwife who's active on Twitter who went to the nurses' register and they couldn't find this guy's name in either the English or the Irish nurses' register, and kept looking, and turned out this guy had previous convictions and was never a nurse, was employed for a short period of time by a hospital as a porter. But it took someone on Twitter to expose this. We've had the same woman expose. A friend of hers was walking through Dublin and was stopped by a group of no campaigners, and a young woman said to her, well, I'm a student midwife, and gave her a whole load of misinformation, not realizing she was speaking to an actual midwife. And the woman said to her, where are you studying? And she named a college, and only this woman, who is a midwife, knew that there is no midwifery course in this college. She became suspicious. And when she continued talking to her, it turned out that she's a second-year student pretending to be a trained nurse and a student midwife. We recently had a bishop saying, only the other day, saying that abortion is worse than rape. We've had videos of them ripping down the posters from the Yes campaign and dumping them.
And actually, it wasn't just that abortion was worse than rape as an act. Somehow the bishop had acquired the knowledge that women suffer more from getting an abortion than they do from being raped.
Well, this is a common thing that's gone around. There was this whole thing that that if a woman who's raped goes on to have the baby, that the hormones that are released from giving birth somehow cure the trauma of the rape. And this is a very common anti-choicer myth that they've put, and one that's stuck around for quite a while. It's annoying to see a bishop who should know better.
You would think.
Men do have some education, buying into this. And we've had priests reading letters from the pulpit to their parishioners. We've had there was an incident of a communion mass where children were making their first Holy Communion, and they started talking about abortion and the referendum and how everyone was to vote no from the altar during the communion mass, when there was very young children there having their special day to them. And we've had venues that have had to cancel events because they've received threats.
Lots of them, yes.
Lots of them. You're aware of some, John?
In Monaghan, that's right,
Yeah. We've had, as you said, the graphic imagery put outside the maternity hospitals. These are 6 foot, 7 foot posters.
Yeah. And there's wasn't there fascist signs at one of the pro-choice campaigns?
Yeah, they had a guy who made up fake fake signs, and distributed them amongst the marchers at a rally, a pro-choice rally. And it was some old 70s British fascist logo on them, which these young girls wouldn't recognise for what it was. And it had because there had been a strike for repeal campaign a while back, which was very popular with the student movement. They put the strike for repeal wording over this fascist logo. Then someone recorded it going, oh, look, they're all fascists on this protest march, having planted these posters there.
Somebody fancies themselves as an Irish Roger Stone, getting up to carry on like that.
We've had canvassers being abused, verbally abused and threatened. I've done a fair bit of canvassing, and most of the people who are voting no are very polite. They're firm, but polite. But I did have one guy who was extremely abusive. I was a baby murderer. I was a slut. I was a whore. And followed us down the garden path and stood in the street and screamed abuse down the road. Our own Jane Donnelly from Atheist Ireland, our human rights officer, was at the Atheist Ireland table today on O'Connell Street in Dublin, and they ended up having to actually ask a guard to come over because the behaviour was so threatening towards them. anti-choice. There was actually there's a lovely old nun who comes over and has a chat with us whenever she's in town and sees us. And she's a lovely lady. We always have very respectful conversations. And she always tells us, well, I continue to pray for you and God bless you all. And, you know, it's always lovely. And she was chatting to one of our members when they arrived over at the table. And she actually was really, really shocked and was scared by them. They terrified this old nun.
Yeah.
You know, they're horrible, horrible people. And that's nothing to say about the scaremongering and the false information. Their whole campaign has been built around false information. But they're so clever because there's a grain of truth. So they'll say, it's about abortion up to 6 months. There's a grain of truth. They ignore the detail. And it's just enough. All they have to do is just muddy the waters.
Yeah.
And they're good at that.
Well, speaking of the grain of truth, another one of the common slogans on the no posters talks about a fetus at 9 weeks yawning and sucking its thumb. And I was told today on the canvas today that a fetus at 8 weeks has fingernails. Now, why fingernails would be a reason to vote no to the 8th is a new one on me, but that was given to me today as a reason to vote no, because an 8-week-old fetus has fingernails. But when I just kind of Googled the images, and yeah, the images that they're showing purporting to be a 12-week-old fetus don't seem to be the ones that Google returns.
No, I don't know where they're getting their. There's one graphic that they're using for the 12-week argument, and it's a cartoon drawing of these women never have a face or a head. They're always just a bump if they're in the image. Yeah. Because it's usually just this fetus floating around in the ether somewhere, right, without any woman actually in the picture. This one is a pretty much ready to pop, fully developed. You know, she's about to go baby there, like. There's a little blue bird tweeting around inside the womb as well, which always really worries me. And this is the image that they've used for the 12-week argument. You know, they're just making this up. They're making this shit up as they go along at this stage.
Yeah.
But they're just, it's consistent, and it's got the grain of truth, and it's enough to muddy the waters. And I've spoken to a lot of people who would say, I'm really undecided. You know, I think women should have a choice, but I keep seeing these images of 12-week fetuses and how they've got a heartbeat and they've got fingerprints, and I just don't know. And they're just, and what will happen is that the undecided will either not vote because they can't make up their minds, so they'll just abstain, or they'll vote no just to keep the status quo because they're too scared to vote yes because they don't feel they're well enough informed. And that's the strategy. That's the strategy. Yeah.
So I know another dispute is over the statistics around abortion rates in other countries. Have the statistics been accurate, or do the rates even matter, given that the no side is not proposed to any rate that they find acceptable anyways?
Well, that's a really good point, because, you know, most of the no side will tell you that there's never any reason for an abortion. There's never any medical reason. There's never any health reason. There's never any social reason. They call mental health like a very muddy area, you know. But the whole thing about the statistics, it's a really difficult one to prove or to disprove, because, again, it's got that grain of truth. If you look at the statistics for the UK, they're saying that 1 in 5 pregnancies end in abortion. What they're not including in that figure is the number of miscarriages, because they're looking at the number of live births and the number of pregnancies, and they're taking one from the other and coming up with a number. They're not looking at the number of miscarriages, and they're not looking at the number of women from Ireland who are travelling to the UK to access abortion, which will push that number up anyway. But then does it really matter? Because, you know, is there an acceptable, like, if we reach, you know, a low enough level, then we just accept that when a woman needs an abortion, she needs an abortion. So it doesn't matter whether it's 1 in 5 or, it is what it is. It's the number of women who have had crisis pregnancies.
Yeah, that's it. Because, I mean, the same people were opposed to contraception, for example. And, I mean, there's no sense in which contraception becomes more acceptable if there are fewer condoms sold or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's very much the same. So, I'm always hesitant to kind of even get into that argument. But yeah, to address it, because again, it's a misinformation they've put out there. But at what point then will they turn around and go, okay, we've got an acceptable level of abortions?
Yeah.
And I'd love if there was never any crisis pregnancy, because it's a woman it's less women in situations that is distressing for them. But if you're serious about lowering the number of crisis pregnancies, then make contraception free.
Yeah.
Give really good sex education to our young people. There's actual practical things that you can do, which our country hasn't done. So they've never been serious about this,
Not just that they haven't done, they've been explicitly opposed to more available contraception and more objective sex ed.
Yeah. So and now they're saying, oh, well, the 8th Amendment can stay and we can still address this abortion issue through better contraception and sex ed. You've had 35 years.
Sure.
So all of a sudden it's an issue now with you? No, fine at all.
Yeah, and you mentioned Down Syndrome Ireland earlier, Ashling. It's particularly noticeable that the No side continues to quote what seem to be very misleading statistics about Down syndrome, even when the Down syndrome organisation themselves are opposing that. It just seems so transparent that they're less concerned with people who have Down syndrome and more concerned with their own narrow political interests.
It's disgusting the way they're using vulnerable people as pawns in their argument, despite being asked explicitly not to. And there's another group, Inclusion Ireland, which is an group for people with disabilities, with intellectual disabilities, and they have come out in support of repealing the 8th Amendment because they recognise that as vulnerable people with disabilities need abortion.
Yeah.
And people with disabilities, with physical disabilities, are most impacted because they find it the most difficult to travel to access abortion. If you're a woman and you have to travel to England to have an abortion, it's difficult. If you're a woman who's socioeconomically disadvantaged, it becomes even more difficult. If you're a woman who's socioeconomically disadvantaged and has a disability, getting on and off a plane, that physical act alone becomes more difficult. So the thing is that the Yes campaign has always recognised that people with disabilities are most impacted by the 8th Amendment. Migrant women are most impacted by the 8th Amendment. Refugee women who don't have papers to travel. The other side look at these people and see pawns that they can somehow play with and make victims. And we mentioned earlier the Iceland being very often used.
Yeah.
Where they'll say that and it was CNN ran this report, if I remember correctly, that there was no babies born in Iceland with Down syndrome, and it was completely wrong. What the situation in Iceland and with Down syndrome is that women are offered the test as part of their prenatal care, or their and some women will choose to take the test. Other women will choose not to take the test.
Yeah.
Of the women who choose to take the test, almost all of them, if they have returned the result of Down syndrome, would choose to terminate the pregnancy. Of the women who chose not to take the test, a certain percent of those would go on to give birth to babies with Down syndrome. So it's not true to say that there are no babies with Down syndrome in Iceland. So, but that's a much more difficult thing to explain than quick, snappy, there's no babies born in Iceland with Down syndrome. That's very easy to just put out there. And then the other side are constantly scrambling to correct this misinformation. So it puts your opposition on the back foot all the time, because you're constantly trying to correct and fix and this misinformation. It's a very clever strategy, but it's a very heartless strategy.
That's true.
So one thing that's changed this debate over the years now is the widespread use of abortion pills that can be ordered online now. Is it fair to say that the referendum is less about whether abortion will be in Ireland and more about whether abortion will be safe or not?
Absolutely. And this was a huge issue that came up at the Citizens' Assembly and at the Joint Oireachtas Committee. And for a lot of people, it was eye-opening that abortions happen in Ireland. People thought that there was that the eighth had worked. The purpose of the eighth was to keep Ireland abortion-free. And when they had the other referendum that said women had the right to travel, they were kind of saying, look, we accept that women will go abroad for abortions, but we've managed to keep Ireland abortion-free. And for a lot of people, it was a shock to learn that women could buy these pills online, have them imported, take them at home, and the abortions are happening in Ireland. The problem is that while a lot of the groups like Women on Web and Women Helping Women, you'll log on, you'll do your consultation with the GP. You can take them up to, I think it's 9 weeks. I think they'll dispense them from Women on Web, and they'll pop them in the post, and you'll get them, and you'll get your instructions, and you're still taking these pills without medical supervision. And because abortion is illegal in Ireland and carries a 14-year prison sentence, that if there is a complication, the women are less likely to go and seek help. And what they'll be told when they're buying the pills is, if you're worried, so they'll be told something like, you shouldn't soak more than 2 sanitary towels in an hour, as a rough guideline. If you're soaking more than 2 sanitary towels in an hour, there might be a problem. Go seek medical help. Sometimes the girls and women aren't, because they're worried that someone will contact the guards and that they'll be arrested for breaking the law. So if the eighth isn't repealed, there is a very, very real fear that we will be waking up one morning to read about a girl or a woman bleeding to death in her bedroom from an abortion pill without medical supervision. That's
scary.
A very real fear. So, so I think it's a lot of the conversations I have with people where they're undecided. It's usually, look, you're saying, I don't agree with abortion. I probably would never have had one myself. But I understand that sometimes there's tragedy, like, and there's hard cases, there's rape, there's incest, there's fetal abnormalities. But we don't want these young flighty things just going around popping these pills. And to try and make people understand that that's not the way it is. But these girls are, and these women are taking these pills. And is it not better that if they're going to take them, that we know that there's a safety net there to catch them, that they're taking them under supervision of a medical practitioner, be that their GP, or if they've gone to a clinic, that there's someone there who's watching out for them and that they're safe.
And
you kind of have that conversation. People kind of go, yeah, you have a point there.
I'm struck by what you mentioned there in terms of the attitude to flighty women popping these pills like contraception. And I know this is a sample of one, but from the canvas I've done, I get the people who say you're promoting premeditated, cold-blooded murder are most often elderly men, and the people who talk about all these flighty young girls who just be popping these pills all the time, that's normally elderly women in my experience. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe there's some idea of, we've had this incredibly repressive environment that we grew up in, and you should have to do the same thing that we did, or some kind of logic like that. Or else maybe I'm just not getting a representative sample.
I think you're onto something there. That would very closely mirror what I've experienced. I think that for the men, it's just a complete lack of understanding. That's a woman thing, and they don't want to know. They don't want to talk about it. The women I find more difficult because you would expect more empathy from a woman towards some of the older women that I've spoken to who are going to vote yes really do get it. I spoke to an elderly woman. She came out to the door in a Zimmer frame. She was well into her 80s. And I was like, oh, no, here we go. I had fully expecting to be called a murderer. And she said, I had 5 kids. That I had my last child when I was 42. She said, I had a scare. She said, when I was about 45, I thought I was pregnant. She said, and I had decided if I was, that I was going to throw myself off a bridge into the river. She said, I know what it's like. She said, she says, I haven't a doubt in my mind that if I'd wound up pregnant at 45, she said, I'd have thrown myself off a bridge into the river. Because she said her mind was fully made up. That's what she was going to do. So some women do understand, and other women seem to have an attitude, like you said, well, I had to put up with it. So, just go with it, and that's your lot, and go away with your notions.
Yeah. It's very strange, but listen, give me some good news. Ashling, you attend some of the campaign meetings, I know, and you won't want to betray any confidences, but my impression is that
I'm not John McGurk's loyal mole.
Well, we're going to move on from the Irish Roger Stone, and my impression is certainly online the no side got a head start and seems to have been spending an absolute fortune. And you can't click on a web page without seeing a no ad. My hope was that the yes side are saving up their cash for a big push in the last 2 weeks, but it seems like that won't be possible anymore with the Google and Facebook decisions. But what's your sense? Do you think the no side or the yes side has some money to spend to catch up in the last 2 weeks, or are we just going to be outspent massively?
Well, we always knew we'd be outspent massively. There was never any doubt of that. And that's why for so many years now, the focus has been on building that groundswell of support. So that's why you have canvas groups, the length and breadth of the country, out having conversations on doorsteps, which the no side doesn't have. They like to pretend and put out, but I've seen them put up photographs of a canvas group standing in a town centre, and I think they said lovely day in Leitrim for a canvas, and then from a slightly different angle the same canvas group going, look at us all here in Clare, we're having a great day. like seriously lads, we know what you're doing. So they like to pretend that they have huge canvas groups. They have brought in a lot of American students in to volunteer and to help out and to bulk up numbers. Their main strategy, from what I can figure, and I have to admit I was very, very, very worried, was because we've seen it happen with Trump, we've seen it happen with Brexit. It's the use of dark ads and data phishing. So you go onto Facebook and they were putting up these ads going, got questions about the aid? For unbiased information, click here, and it would bring you to a website which wasn't unbiased. And also they were collecting all your data. And then a few days later, the ad and the website would just disappear. And we knew that they had been doing this for a number of weeks. So we knew that they were busy collecting data. Now, again, it wasn't the Irish media who blew the lid on all of this. It was a guy on Twitter who just got in, started digging around. And eventually the media picked up. And actually Channel 4 News in the UK did a really good piece.
Yeah, I saw the Channel 4 piece.
So in response, Facebook initially said that they were banning ads on Facebook from organisations based outside of the Republic of Ireland. So that was a welcome piece of news. And that was followed then the following day with Google saying, well, actually, we're going to ban all ads from all sides of this referendum. So that will be on YouTube as well. The yes side welcomed the news because we knew that there was no way we can compete with it, because this is a completely unregulated area. So any organization from anywhere in the world can pump as much money as they want into those ads. And we knew that they had collected all this data. And the word that I heard was that there was anything up to $2 million sitting ready to push these ads in the final week before the referendum. These ads were running constantly on YouTube. Kids playing online games where they break for ads, apparently. There's a Peppa Pig game or something that the kids play online. And in the breaks, there was anti-choice ads being run in kids' games. I have a security app on my phone that runs ads. I was getting the ads coming up on my phone connected to the security app. They were everywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think we were quite close to how we thought the No campaign were planning this strategy, but by their reaction to the news that Google were banning these ads. They had an emergency press briefing, like they summoned the press to this emergency meeting, and they were frothing at the mouth with the anger that Google was going to censor them. And the fact that people were pointing out going, well, they're not going to play ads from either side of this referendum. They're not going to play the yes side ads either. No, they were furious. So I think it's a major setback for them. I'm hoping that it has created a more level playing field. And since that piece of news earlier on in the week, we've seen a whole plethora of new posters go up the length and breadth of the country. So they've obviously decided that's what they're going to spend the remaining money on is more posters and more billboards. And the Yes campaign in the final week before the referendum, they ran a crowdfund, and they were looking to raise 500,000 for posters. Went well over that. They ran a second one for 100,000, and they got over that. And they're going to have a contract with the postal delivery service that a leaflet will go to every home in the country, explaining the facts to try and counteract some of the lies. So that's to happen now in the final week. So that would be a fair bit of money now to deliver a leaflet, to flyer, to a booklet to every single household. So that's where the crowdfunded money has gone. And they have a road show going around at the moment as well, where they're just visiting all the towns. So, but every cent of that money was crowdfunded from putting in €20 here, €5, €50. It was a few thousand people putting in what they could afford.
Yeah, and it's amazing, Seamus. I'm sure you don't see it because I know the ads are all geo-targeted. But the Yes campaign had a really well-produced video with a lot of famous Irish actors. So there was Saoirse Ronan and Cillian Murphy and the guy off of Game of Thrones and all the Irish.
Which one?
Or both of them. Liam Cunningham.
He's right.
But I mean, unless you go looking for it, you'll not see it. I mean, I don't know how many people have seen it. I'm sure very few. But yet, anyone in Ireland who turns on a browser and goes to almost any page, you just cannot miss all of these no ads being thrown at you. So I know House of Cards isn't on TV anymore, but CNN's much better now. So, like, even when I tune in to see Jake Tapper giving Giuliani a hard time, I'll get no ads popping up in the middle of that. It's just inescapable at the moment.
And they're so glossy. They're so well produced. I mean, no money has been spared on these ads. They're not, they're not cheap. They're full color surround sound. Yeah,
that's
proper for money. Yeah. But it's, like I said, it's completely unregulated area, so it's somewhere that the Irish legislation has to catch up now. It could be the thing that loses the referendum for the yes side. I think it lost Brexit. I think it got Donald Trump elected. We know they have exactly the same company working for them. So we've no reason to think that they won't be as successful as Brexit and Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So it's concerning. It's concerning, but hopefully this now Google not running the ads will hopefully have caught it on time. I don't know though.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least this will actually be decided about a vote instead of an electoral college, like the elections over here. So, a common feature among religious inspired laws is scaremongering about consequences, right? You know, the morality of things, how it's going to suddenly change. We're told about allowing divorce, contraception, gay marriage. Each would open up the floodgates, and huge problems in society would then ensue. Is this true about the fear of abortion on the no side?
Oh, absolutely. But what they don't know is, I'm just sitting here waiting to plan my abortion party, because that's what us women do. We'll come together in a coven. We'll plan these pregnancies, and then we'll plan these abortion parties, and it'll be great. We'll all have whiskey, and it's ridiculous.
You and Lena Dunham, Ashling.
But it's so disrespectful towards women. It's like, that women don't think about that this isn't a difficult decision, that it's something that they don't have sleepless nights over. That they just, if I know I can get an abortion, then actually don't bother putting a condom on. I'll just nip down the clinic and have an abortion. It really just sums up the misogyny, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's a part of the argument. That as soon as abortion is legal, that we'll be just running out having them morning, noon, afternoon, and then one in the evening just for good measure. And it's just nasty misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, it really is. And every time someone uses the floodgates argument, and I've said to them, but they said the same about divorce. Oh, well, divorce is different now. This is abortion we're talking about. But why do you think that women are going to do this? What possible reason have you to believe that women are just sitting home going, Jesus, I hope I get pregnant so I can have an abortion?
Yeah.
They're very crap together.
It's not crazy.
At all. Crazy.
It's crazy. So, listen, Ashling, anyone who's been following you on Twitter knows you've been spending so much time canvassing that I'm embarrassed sucking up all of your time this evening. You should be going putting your feet up for a while.
But you know what? There are women out there who have canvassed every single day, every single evening. The only day they take off is Sunday, and we call it Self-Care Sunday. And we just share pictures of what they're doing, just to put their feet up and relax and eat some cake.
Yeah.
Because there's one woman, and the canvas group I belong to, one of the organisers, her mum has canvassed like every 7 days in a row, just out canvassing constantly. I'm put to shame by just the energy that these women have, the passion that they have, the drive. I don't think, I know for marriage equality, we felt that there was a social movement behind this. There was a real desire for change. And I thought I understood it then, because I went out and canvassed on marriage equality as an ally for my LGBT friends and the LGBT community in Ireland. And I thought I understood what they were going through and how difficult it was for them to have to knock on a door and ask for their human rights to be recognised. But until you're in that position yourself, and that's what these women are doing, they're going around door to door saying, can I have my bodily autonomy, please? Is it okay with you if I'm actually considered to be worth more than a bundle of cells, than a fetus? That's, in one way, it's degrading. In another way, I'm just amazed by how powerful these women are, that they can keep doing this day after day. And the abuse they get called murderers. We've been called cunts. We've been called whores. We've been told we've blood on our hands. And they just dust themselves down and turn up the next day. It's absolutely awe-inspiring.
Indeed.
Whatever. I fear. I know when the marriage equality referendum was happening, I had a lot of young LGBT people saying, if this doesn't pass, I don't see a future for me in this country. And a lot of young people saying they would leave because they considered it a real rejection of who they were and their place in society. And I think the really, the worrying thing is a no vote on the 26th of May when they're counting these results isn't a vote for the unborn. It's a vote against women.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how women are going to come back from that. I worry as a society how Ireland will come back from society just turning around and saying, actually, do you know what? These were good enough for the Magdalene laundries. These were good enough for the mother and baby homes. Go back out with you now and don't be getting notions and thinking you're important.
Mm-hmm.
I can see a lot of our young women leaving, but I dread to think how the impact it's going to have on how women will react to just that dismissal of their human rights.
Yeah, well, I hope to goodness we can get over the line.
Well, it worries. It worries. I wake up 2 o'clock in the morning and you lie there thinking, Jesus, what if we don't do this? Because I don't think we're going to get this chance again.
Oh, for sure. It'll be a long number of years before it comes around again.
Because no politician will want to touch it.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So, listen, before you go, Ashling, can you tell people how to connect with you and also anyone who wants to make a donation or support the Yes campaign, where's the best place for them to do that?
Okay, so if you want to support Together for Yes, because they are registered with Zippo, which is our standard in public office, you can't donate to them if you are not a citizen of Ireland or if you're not a resident in Ireland. So you can donate if you're a citizen living abroad, or if you're a resident, but not if you're like just a tourist visiting the country. Mm-hmm. And there's limits on how much you can donate. But you can donate by going to togetherforyes.ie. If you are living abroad, you didn't hear this from me, but there is a lovely shop that you can purchase some very nice merchandise for. And there's no limit on how much merchandise you can purchase if you feel better. But you didn't hear that from me. If you want to connect with myself, I'm on Twitter, Ashling O'Brien. You'll find me there. Our email atheist.ie, and you'll catch one of the committee there. Mm-hmm. Anyone who hears this who'd like to send messages of support, we'd love to see them on Twitter. Look for the hashtags Together for Yes and Repeal the Eighth, and retweet and show your support. And fingers crossed for. I'm delving into superstitious thinking, but fingers crossed for the 25th.
Indeed. Well, if it doesn't get over the line, Ashling, it won't be because you haven't tried hard enough. So well done on that, and we'll make sure and include all of those links down below there, and encourage people to check those out. So listen, thanks again for that. That's very good of you. Much appreciated, and take care.
Thank you for your continued support. Talk to you again soon, guys. Take care.
All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So yes, I hope Ashling goes and puts her feet up and gets a glass of something strong. She's certainly earned a break at the weekend, and no doubt she'll be giving it everything until the vote. So fingers crossed we can get her over the line.
Yeah, it's 2018. It's hard to believe this is still happening. This is still a discussion. And some of the horror tales that she was sharing is just amazing.
They're incredible, aren't they?
Yeah. And I thought of this, and I almost asked it now. I kind of wish I did. Wasn't there recently, the past year or so, similar to the Sexton gentleman story, about the orphanages and stuff like that, where they found all the corpses and stuff?
Yes, in Tuam, that's right.
Yeah. Wouldn't stories like that push this? I think that's a deterrent of anything,
Yeah, I think this has been an issue in American politics as well, that the conservative right is super concerned with the unborn until the moment they're born, and then they appear to be not in the least concerned. And exactly as you say, there was a very powerful cartoon, I think in one of the newspapers, which had a priest angrily wagging his finger at a woman and shouting murderer and all the rest at a woman who had a crisis pregnancy. Except the priest doing all the shouting wasn't standing on a pulpit. He was standing on top of the bones of all the children and the mass grave in Tuam, which makes exactly the point that you were just discussing. So, the hypocrisy is really incredible.
Well, hopefully everybody sees it for what it is and doesn't buy into all the mindless fear-mongering that these people are spending money on.
Hear, hear.
So, but I hate to use the word faith, but I have faith in the Irish people, so hopefully it comes through.
Fingers crossed.
That's it. Knock on wood and all that. Anywho, but thanks again to Ashling for taking the time out to talk to us about all that. Hopefully next time we talk to her, I'll be on with better news. Hopefully. You already saw the link where you can see all find us, subscribe, all that stuff. So everything's left to tell you is that we're both on Twitter. You can find my lovely brother there, John, at JohnHamill151. Myself, the FT Prophet. Until next time, remember the freedom of thoughts can only be given away, not taken away. Bye, everybody.
Bye, folks.